going to start with a short keynote speech from Celine, Herweijer, who is a partner at PwC, and she's the leader on global innovation sustainability, and she's going to be speaking on the opportunity of AI for the Earth. Not a small subject. Celine.
Thank you. Is this working for everyone? I know that this room is kind of hard to hear, so I'll try and speak up. Hi, everyone. So I have two hats at PwC. I'm Global Innovation Leader and Global Sustainability Leader. So exactly the two worlds that we need to bring together for the topic of our panel session. Before we go into the panel, where we're going to be focusing a lot on kind of real live applications of AI right now in the market for oceans, for weather, for other aspects of our Earth system, I'm going to go a bit macro on you all and hopefully kind of rally us all up in the panel to have a bit of a discussion. So if you're a CEO or a government leader right now, there should be two big things, kind of mega trends that are front of mind for you. First of all, obviously, while we're all here, we're in the middle of a tech revolution. The kind of AI era is upon us and very much in live, in vivo right now. Absolutely transforming all of our industries. When we survey our global CEOs at PwC, 85% are fundamentally concerned about how AI will transform their businesses in the next 3 to 5 years. It's top of the mind for them. So fundamentally transforming industries, fundamentally transforming the way we engage as humans, political, economic systems, economic powers, and scientific discovery and the potential of AI for scientific discovery. So that's one massive transformation that's happening if you're looking out as a CEO or a government leader. The other one concurrently is the fact that our global governments around the world 5 years ago almost signed up to the Global Paris Deal. And basically that means we need to fundamentally decarbonize our system to zero net emissions economy by 2050, by mid-century. That's a rapid transformation of every sector of our economy, whether you're in agriculture, energy, whether you're thinking about cities, mobility, industry, and supply chains. So fundamental decarbonization. Those two things are happening in parallel. And frankly, we're running out of time. Just thinking about nature, we're already at a place where 60% of species are extinct. 1 in 5 species today faces eradication. That becomes 1 in 2 at current rates by the end of this century. That's a fact. If we look at climate change, we have 12 years before we reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming that scientists around the world now agree is a threshold beyond which we get into dangerous climate change. Another fact, 12 years, less than 4,000 days and counting before we reach that threshold. So we really need to rush. We really need to do this rapidly. You know, we talk a lot about shareholder obligation and then the challenge of trying to address shareholder obligation in businesses, right? And there's a lot of discussion now around how you integrate this materially into the way boards and companies think. But if you take a step up from that, we have a moral obligation to protect 3.5 billion years of evolution of life on this earth, which we're currently eradicating in a few generations. So these two massive trends are colliding. We see our young people moving into activism, right? Activism, because they're, you know, anxious and outraged as we should be, and they have clear sight that we need to transform the human systems and our, you know, even our approach to capitalism we were talking about earlier, right? So these fundamental things are happening right now, and traditional policy and market responses aren't going to get us there fast enough. They're critical, but they're not fast enough. We've had 25 years, it took 21 years of UN climate negotiations to reach the global climate deal. 21 years after knowing that we needed to address this problem. 25 years, and we still have global commitments, if you add them up, that take us to 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which is nowhere near fast enough. That's absolutely dangerous climate change. So traditional responses aren't getting us fast enough, but we need rapid systems change. And we've done this before. We've done rapid systems change before in society as human beings through innovation. Now, technology is not the silver bullet. I'm not going to say just go for technology and we're going to get there. Clearly not. It has to be accompanied by massive market systems change as well in terms of policy and regulation. But technology is clearly very important to this transformation. And it's a big opportunity as we're sitting in the period of the fastest, most rapid period of innovation ever, the so-called fourth industrial revolution. It's critical that as we think as a CEO or a government leader about how that tech transformation is going to reshape society and industry, that at the same time we think about how that tech and digital transformation can also help us tackle the issues around, the urgent issues around sustainability. So we've been doing a lot of work in the space of, what we call AI or tech for the Earth at PwC. Just looking at artificial intelligence, we've mapped a database of already over 150 live applications of AI to solve Earth's challenges. I think we have a slide behind me. This is a piece of work that we published in collaboration with Microsoft, I think about a month ago now, looking at the economic impacts around AI and the environment. So for those of you in the climate space, you'll be familiar, there's a lot of work on the economics of climate change, the costs of action, the costs of inaction. In the AI space, there's been quite a bit of work on the cost of AI on the economy, or the benefits AI brings to economy. PwC, we used our global macroeconomic model, and we have this magic number of 15.7 trillion of prize that AI can generate through production and consumption side benefits for the economy in the next 10 or so years. So we took that same model, working in collaboration with Microsoft, and we said, okay, what happens if you look specifically at the AI applications that can create environmental benefits? And we just looked at 4 sectors. We looked at water, transport, energy, and I need a little help here. We're looking at agriculture here, a co-author over here of the report, Ben, thank you. So we just looked at 4 sectors of the economy, so they're not economy-wide. And the headline numbers are just with those 4 sectors, there was 5.2 trillion of economic opportunity generated by those AI for the Earth levers in those 4 sectors of economy by 2030. So that's a huge prize, a huge gain from deploying AI for environmental benefits, just in those sectors. We also at the same time found that in terms of environmental gain, there was a 4% reduction in greenhouse gases. Now, of course, GDP is increasing, so actually if you look at the decarbonisation rate, that's actually around 8%. And that number is equivalent to the emissions of Canada, Australia, and Japan by 2030. So it's quite a large amount, just in those 4 sectors. So obviously that number is conservative. It's conservative because it's not economy-wide. It's conservative because it only looks at the AI applications that are currently live in the market. So for example, for transport, we look at things like route optimization, eco-driving algorithms, so the emergence of AVs and ability to generate mobility on demand. In energy, when we modeled the energy levers through the system, we looked at the increasing optimization of the grid through demand and supply, balancing demand and supply better, dynamic pricing, those types of improvements that if you were at one of the earlier sessions, you would have heard all about here in this space. So it only looks at certain levers, but it still creates that amount of benefit. But most importantly, the number is conservative because the number assumes a business as usual energy mix. It assumes the energy mix that we're expecting with current government commitments around climate and future energy scenarios. And the reality is, as I mentioned before, those take us to 3 degrees of warming. So we absolutely expect that energy mix to decarbonize and hope that energy mix decarbonizes further, which means that we'll create even more greenhouse gas emission potential through that model as well. So that, I mean, this is not, this is one study, it's one bit of research into the opportunity, but hopefully it provides a framing for the narrative that will help focus minds on the opportunity of AI for the Earth. Now, just quickly before I close and hand over to the panel, because we're going to get crunchy in terms of live examples out there right now, I think it's quite an important point to think about. When we as a community or many technologists get together and think about AI issues in the short term, we tend to focus a lot on issues around trust, fairness, ethics, accountability, explainability, bias, all very important issues as we start to adopt AI more in systems and have to trust those systems and trust the decisions that AI makes for us. In the short term, we also start, when we think about society, we think a lot about the impact of automation on jobs and potential job disruption and reskilling and upskilling that's needed. And we're also starting to think about the impact of AI on democracy and on elections. So the EU, for example, is starting to think about that as a critical issue at the moment. But what we don't think about in the short term is the fact that we only have a short term to address these huge environmental challenges that I just spoke about. And so I guess if there's anything that I want you to take away today, if you're a technologist or if you're working in a different industry, is that absolutely a short-term, immediate focus for you in your work should be on how you can unlock the AI for the Earth opportunity. Okay.
Thank you very much, Celine. What I'd like to do is I'd like to make sure I bring in the other three members of this panel. So can I start with Hugh? I'd like each panelist to just take about a minute to introduce himself to all of you in terms of who they are, what they do, etc. And then we're going to jump right in. And Celine, you're going to get my first question. So Hugh.
I'm Hugh Millward. I run corporate, external, and legal affairs for Microsoft here in the UK, and I sit on the UK management team here. But this particular issue is one that I've been working on and thinking about for a long time, particularly as we move from the first, the second, the third, and now the fourth industrial revolution, and looking at what it is that we can learn about what's happened before, that we ensure that we do or don't apply as we move forward with artificial intelligence. And this report and this work actually provides invaluable insight into some of the things that we have to make sure that we don't do as we move forward.
Great. Thank you for that.
Good afternoon. My name is Cunliffe. I'm the Sustainable Development Director at AXA XL, a division of AXA. I run our Ocean Risk Initiative, which basically focuses on how the oceans are changing and how that will impact the future risk landscape. So everything from the impact of ocean warming and therefore sea level rise, increased intensity of storms, increased impact of storm surges, impact on human health, food security, human security, political security, etc. So a whole gamut, really. But today I'm going to think about or focus a little bit more about the use of data in the ocean space, and certainly from an insurance perspective, and how we're using natural capital to develop more resilient societies.
Super. Thank you. Chris.
Hello, can you hear me at the back? Yes. Could be told we have to shout underground. I'm Chris Gorell, more volume. I'm Chris Gorell-Barnes. I've got two hats. I'm the founder of an advertising and communications business called Adjust Your Set, which helps brands be a force for good. We work very closely with the global goals. My other hat is I'm the co-founder of the Blue Marine Foundation, why I'm here today. Our mission is to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030. So we're a non-for-profit. We focus on creating marine protected areas all over the world and new sustainable fishing models and practices to help fishermen and governments protect their fisheries and their oceans.
Great, thank you. And I'm Russ Shaw. I'm the founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates. These are communities of tech leaders coming together, all as volunteers, to promote their ecosystems, their local tech ecosystems, and to deal with the issues and challenges that they face. We're also a founding partner for London Tech Week, so welcome to CogX and welcome to London Tech Week. Now, for those of you in the back, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to walk up and down so that we feel like all of you are participating in this event. We'll try and make sure that standing from the back of the room, we can hear all of you. So how am I coming through to the AV guys? Can you hear me okay? Everything all right? Yes? No? Good. Okay. Celine, first question. You certainly left an impression that the clock is ticking. You talked about the economic opportunities that are here. How are you going to, and maybe with Hugh as well, how are you going to measure year on year whether we're generating the job creation, whether we're reducing the greenhouse gases in line with the overall picture that you've laid out for us? So how are you measuring this?
So, can you hear me, or is this gone off? Yep.
Bit louder, please.
Yep, okay.
Great.
I'm going to move it a bit. Here we go. I mean, measurement is key, obviously, because we can't keep track without measurement. There already is a system in place every single year to measure global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's in progress. I think for me, I mean, kind of going up to the bigger picture on thinking about technology and some of the opportunities that technology can help us with in terms of tackling this issue. I'll just give you one example of that in terms of measurement. So we are now in the age of basically privatization of space. Lots of private satellite companies now in space with incredible amounts of data on what's happening on the surface of the Earth, right? So we're now at a place with technology where we have coverage of the Earth's surface probably a couple of times a day, which is pretty much almost real time, getting down to the resolution of a laptop. Now, I say that in terms of measurement because what that gives us now, as we move forward in time, is an incredible ability for the first time ever to monitor the surface surface of the Earth and what we're doing to the surface of the Earth. This isn't just about greenhouse gas emissions. Right. This is about what's happening with deforestation over in Indonesia. This is about how we're looking after our where illegal fishing is happening in a certain marine protection reserve. So basically, I'm giving you this one example because part of where AI comes in is there is so much data that's coming now, whether that's through Earth observation and the incredible vast amounts of new data we have from these new satellite, micro doves, or whether that's through sensors on the ground, or whether that's through drones and the new data we have of drones, where we're having this incredible power now to monitor the surface of the Earth, and we can't process that in the speed that we need to process that to start bringing in place compliance, enforcement of regulation without having technologies like artificial intelligence as well to be able to get that big soup of data and to start finding the signals we need. So It didn't directly answer your question, but hopefully segmented.
Let's come back to it. We'll pin you down in a bit. Hugh, tell us a bit more about the role of Microsoft here. Obviously, you've worked with Celine in terms of sponsoring this report. When I think of Microsoft, I don't necessarily think of climate change, environmental impact straight away, but obviously the bridge here for you is AI. Tell us more about what you guys are doing to really get in and understand the AI piece, how it can support the whole issue of environmental change, and what are you doing to support startups and scale-ups who are working in this space? Because I know you do a lot of work in that space as well.
What a huge question, Russ.
Go
Thank
for
you very
it.
much.
I know you can answer it.
Well, actually, kind of goes back to the comments I made at the beginning, which is, in many respects, what we have been doing in previous industrial revolutions is we've been borrowing for the future to pay for the present. And we've got to stop doing that. We have to, that has got to end. Yep. We've also got to deal with this issue of these twin global trends that you mentioned of decarbonization and digitization. And how do we make sure that we're bringing, two completely different sets of challenges, two very different groups of people? How do we bring them together so that they can focus, so that collectively we can focus on the issues that are existential for our society, for our planet, for the way in which we function? And I think that's where we play a role as Microsoft. In many respects, we're not building the technologies. We are providing the building blocks, which people like those in this room are going to build the technologies on that will solve a lot of these problems.
Tell us some of those building blocks. What are the specific ones that you're working on to help the people in this room do what we want to try and do with respect to the environment?
Yeah, so you've got, if you think about the ability to run huge workloads in cloud, if you think about the ability to do things like, we have hundreds of different types of artificial intelligence that are built into the Microsoft cloud that effectively open up artificial intelligence and the ability to use artificial intelligence right down to small companies. You don't need to have deep pockets in order to be able to drive fundamental changes in the way that you apply artificial intelligence. That's kind of the democratization of AI. And if we can keep at scale the development and the building of those toolkits, those APIs, all the different elements that make sure that that these solutions can be built, and keep the cost down as much as possible, then actually you allow 1,000 flowers to bloom. You allow those companies like those in the room to really go to market on a series of different solutions built on the back of it.
Great, thank you. I want to bring Chip and Chris into the discussion now. Let's talk about the oceans. Why are the oceans such a big topic? Is plastic really the big issue relating to the oceans? And what are your roles in terms of looking at the oceans and how to tackle this problem? I keep hearing about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the Northern Pacific, and you see you see snippets of this. Is that real? Should we be worried about it? What are your views? Why don't we start with Chip, and then we'll go to Chris.
Okay. It's an issue, and I think what's very useful is the fact that it does bring in the general public into this space. And in fact, just going back to Celine's point about 25 years, it's took the UN 25 years to put the ocean into the UN FCCC's climate change reports. So that happened for the first time at COP21. Now, since David Attenborough and all things blue, we are seeing, evidently that being pushed up the agenda. and I suspect from a scientific perspective, plastic is a problem, but it's not the problem. It is about...
So we're being told the wrong thing. Because
No,
we're all
it's
being
no-
told that plastic is the problem, and you're saying that's not the case.
No, I didn't say it wasn't. I'm just saying that it depends upon how you read the newspaper.
Okay.
And journalists will focus on that because it has a connection to yourself and myself and what we can do specifically. But actually, it's ocean acidification, it's ocean warming, it's the amount of carbon dioxide that we're pumping into the atmosphere. That's the biggest problem.
Okay.
And indeed, what we're seeing is that the oceans are warming, and that warming ocean is having tremendous change in everything that we're seeing, whether it be looking at weather system changes and the likelihood of that, increased intensity of storms, sea ice loss, fish populations moving. It's those things that you don't see that are probably the bigger problems. However, where we sit as an insurance industry, and certainly what I'm focusing on, is how we provide a more resilient society from those changes that are taking place. And that's more specifically focusing on what's happening in the coastal zone. So those people who live in small island developing states or the emerging economies, they're the ones who are less able to get back on their feet once hurricanes rip through their front garden and probably their house. And or it may well be something to do with, as I said before, the political fallout of something like that happening. So what are we able to do? And we see that there's a real need to focus on natural capital, so the focus on coral reefs and mangroves as the first line of defense to the impacts of these changes. And I can go into a little bit more detail in a second because I'm conscious I don't want to take up all of this time. But going back to your question,
Yep.
Plastic, yes, problem. I think that's a land-based problem necessarily rather than an ocean-based problem.
Great. Chris, jump in on this, please.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what Celine said when you talk about all the mapping of the Earth. Is what we have to remember is we live on planet ocean. So 71% of the surface of the Earth is in fact ocean. And if I can ask everybody to take 2 deep breaths under this tunnel. One more. Every second breath we take comes from the ocean. So the ocean is the life support system of the planet. It produces 60% of the oxygen we breathe. It absorbs more than 50% of the carbon we produce. So if the ocean doesn't function, we can't function, right? And the best thing about the plastics crisis is it's made people give a shit about the ocean. Yep. Before Blue Planet 2, before plastic, no one gave a fuck about the ocean. It was out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
Now people care about the ocean. But as you said, plastics is a land-based issue. It needs to be solved on land. The 2 big challenges we have with the ocean is warming, which means acidification.
Yep.
The ocean is warming in an absolutely terrifying way, and overfishing. We are taking all of the good stuff out of the ocean. So we are destroying the ocean by taking out all of the fish. So 90% of the large fish in the ocean are gone, which means that not only are we destroying a protein source and a food source for 1 billion of the poorest people on the planet, but we are destroying the marine ecosystem, because if there aren't fish, then the coral reef's not going to be healthy, the marine ecosystem won't be healthy, which means the ocean will die. And if the ocean dies, we die. So the single most important thing we have to do to protect life on Earth is to have a healthy marine ecosystem.
Okay. Is it too late? I mean, the plastics are in the ocean. I'm eating plastic in my fish. Global warming, the seas are warming up. It's going to take us forever to turn that back. Mangroves are disappearing. Coral reefs are being bleached. Is it game over? And if it isn't, tell us how you think AI can help us to win it back. Who wants to go first? Chris.
So the good news
Yep.
is that we don't need any more science, we don't need any more information. We know exactly what we need to do, which is we need to create large-scale marine protected areas. So when you protect large areas of the ocean, it has an amazing ability to recover. So if you stop fishing and you leave the fish to be able to recover, you leave a healthy area, then the ocean comes back to life, which therefore means that the ocean is healthy, which means it acts, it is able to produce oxygen and absorb carbon. So if we create marine protected areas, of which the targets are that we need to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030 in order for the ocean to have a chance of recovery. Right now, we are at about 6.5%, so there's a hell of a long way to go. But governments are signing up to create these marine protected areas, and what we need to do is to make sure that we push the governments to actually deliver on their promise to create these marine protected areas.
So what you're saying is, it kind of links back to my first question to Celine. So every year we have to add at least, 2% more to those protected areas if we're going to reach 30%? How are we doing? I mean, are you optimistic that every year we're going to get another couple of percent added to what's protected? Or is it game over?
I think you have to be optimistic. You have to have the right blend of fear and optimism. You know, we've got to be shit scared, but we've also got to be optimistic that we can do it, because we do know how to do it. And when you do it, the results are staggering. So we've got a big pivotal moment in 2020, which we all know about, that we're all driving up to, and a lot of countries have signed up that they will protect 10% by 2020. Great. The UK government have done one thing very well, which they are ahead of target, and some countries like Chile are doing very well. So I'm optimistic that we will move the dial now that oceans really has got a voice and people are starting to care about oceans, that I believe we will start to see more marine protected areas from countries in the next few years.
Okay, Chip, do you want to come back in on that? And then Celine, I'll shift over to you.
Yeah, in fact, just last week we heard that Bermuda was going to protect 20% of their waters, and that's been a long time coming. So, small things, but that's 90,000 kilometres squared of their waters that will be protected. I think that, just coming back on the point about are we in the right space? Well, I think that data is exactly the point, and I think this is exactly what we need. It's the utilisation of that data and how we are able to work that to our collective, or for the collective good. Part of that, I think, is I think one of the problems is the fact that data comes in all different all different sort of shapes and sizes, as it were. And actually, you need to make sure that data is usable almost in one way. And without that, I think it becomes a real problem. So we have data, as Celine was talking about, the fact that we have all of this, all these private satellites. We have got the US, the UK, the EU, and the rest. The problem is it all sort of sits in different databases. And what we need to do is we need to bring it together. We need to try and work out or work together to develop one way of working with that data.
How are you going to do that?
Well, there are different alliances already working. So the Ocean Data Alliance just newly set up this last year. And we as a business are starting to work in that space as well. Yep. So I think there are a few things out there. It's just and I think the fantastic thing is with the fact that the oceans are moving up that political agenda, it actually moves that dial forward.
Great. Celine, I know you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, is this working again?
Yep, we can hear you. A bit louder.
Yeah, I'm a born and bred oceanographer from the beginning. But so, I guess it was the other half. You said the number one is around marine protected areas. You also said climate change is key, right? So I guess it's the other part, to save the oceans. Warming and acidification is key, and therefore at the same time we also need to tackle the global climate crisis in addition to those protected areas. And then that comes back to, is that mission possible? And it has to be mission possible. We have no other choice as a humanity right now to make that mission possible. The good news is that we know even in the most hard to abate sectors, there's a great report called Mission Possible, for example, by the Energy Transitions Committee, which lines out how we undertake that through policy and market change and through the big innovations we need to kind of bet on and put finance into. And absolutely, we have most of the innovations are in the market and need scaling, and then there's a few that need to come in. But fundamentally, we talk a lot about AI, and kind of coming back to the report, technology does have a vital role to play in a lot of those, right? One of the characteristics of artificial intelligence is fundamentally it increases productivity of systems and reduces waste as a result of systems, right? So whether that is a mobility network, an energy grid, whatever it might be, that ability to increase productivity. But that is all good, well and good. But if you can't change the energy mix itself, right? So we have these fantastic machine learning algorithms, but if they're not fed by a cloud that's fed by 100% renewable energy, we're in trouble again, which is why I was saying there's not a silver bullet. You need the policy and regulation to come along with the digitization of the economy at the same time.
Which is also why quantum is so exciting.
Okay.
Because I know we're moving beyond AI here, but actually the promise of quantum to be able to make significant improvements in exactly those kind of things, including far greater efficiency of energy transfer and energy use and energy production, plus the ability to solve some of the significant kind of systemic environmental issues like fixing nitrogen and those kind of things, is incredibly exciting. But it's going to need AI to get to the ability to actually get value from quantum.
All right, I want to challenge you because, hold on one second, I want to challenge you and I'll bring you in.
Okay.
You said the promise of quantum. We're 12 years away from burning the planet beyond recognition. How can we reconcile the promise of something that we don't yet fully know and understand how it will help with the reality of, there's no planet B by 2030. So how do you expedite that? How do you fast forward on the whole quantum aspect of this to be a problem solver quickly?
Yeah, so you have to do lots and lots of things at the same time.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, we can't work in series on this. It's got to be in parallel, which is why you have to. So our quantum offer is different from other quantum offers on the market, and we think we're going to be in a position to be able to do something very exciting within a 5-year period. Okay, so that's exciting. That is meaningful impact within a shorter time frame. But at the same time, we've got to get more out of AI. So having programs like we have a whole series of them, but lots of other companies as well, about how do we actually stimulate the market in generation of new innovations on the back of AI to make a meaningful difference in this space is just so important.
Okay, you've got an audience of technologists here, all focused on AI. What is your specific message to this whole group to say, we need to get more from you now? What do you say to them? And what role does Microsoft play to help these folks? Because most of these are startups and scale-ups, all in the thick of AI and its potential. What do? How do you get this group mobilized?
Well, I mean, that is a big question, and there are lots of ways to answer that. But I do think that there are, for example, we've got a grant program that is built on how do we provide, financial support, computing support, and a whole range of other kind of elements to nurture AI development in these very specific places. Okay, so AI for Earth does this around environmental interventions. AI for Accessibility does this around accessibility functions. But those grants are very real, they're very available, and they're open for now. And lots of other companies do the same thing. So there is resources that we're putting in place there. Another really good example is the kind of incubation of ideas that we and other companies provide as well. So our accelerator in East London is taking through a cohort right now of a series of, they're not startups, it's more scale-ups really, built around accessibility and environment and sustainability. But it is making real, it's not just the investment, it's also the kind of support package all the way around them, helping with the next round of funding, helping with making the kind of introductions within the technology world that can take an idea and turn it into something that is global.
So you're trying to build an ecosystem around these smaller businesses that you're supporting to help tackle these problems that we're talking about. So that's a key role
right.
from
Thank you,
Microsoft.
Russ.
Great, thank you. Hugh, Chris, do you want to jump back in? You wanted to jump in. Sorry.
I was just going to say an example of quantum, which I think is really exciting, is one of the big issues with ocean is actually tracking IUU fishing, which is illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. And there's a great AI technology, Global Fishing Watch, which uses satellite data and cameras on fishing vessels. There's about 4.8 million fishing vessels out there, and they can track them all. But of course, that uses a lot of computer-generated power. But with quantum, it can actually check a month after a fishing vessel's been there by the exhaust fumes of the fishing vessel. So it can actually see if fishing vessels are illegally fishing in particular areas.
Yes.
I think that's a really important point, because what you've just signaled there is the fact that actually we are able to benefit from the thinking that quantum is driving right now. So although we haven't got to the point where quantum computing at whatever it is, 0.1 of a Kelvin or 0.01 of a Kelvin, is actually developing, the thinking behind quantum is already having an impact. And we can do, so we built a new programming language that quantum will ultimately use, but actually we're able to model some of those using AI, model some of the processes that quantum will use, and be able to do things we weren't able to do before, just because of the research into quantum that's taking place.
Okay, very good. Now, I want Chris and Chip, I'd like you to also reflect back on Celine's presentation, because I was certainly left with a very positive impression about the economic benefit, that there's a lot of money to be made here. There's a lot of job growth and job creation and economic stimulation from this all happening. How do you see this in terms of the areas that you're working in with respect to the oceans? Do you agree that the economic opportunities are there, that there's job creation that's going to come to help us to tackle this problem?
The ocean as economy is worth $24 trillion. So okay. I think it's $3.3 trillion a year. So it's it has the seven largest GDP in the world if you were to compare it to a country. So it's absolutely enormous in terms of the economic benefits. And, in order to get ocean wealth, we have to have ocean health. In order to have ocean health, we've got to have the right data sets, because we need to be able to monitor how healthy the ocean is in order to be able to protect it. So I think AI is hugely important. There's a couple of examples that I wanted to bring up. One is what IBM is doing with smart microscopes. Okay. So plankton is almost it's like the canary in the coal mine, right? Yep. It will tell you how healthy the ocean is, but it's been very, very difficult to actually tell the health of plankton. So with these smart microscopes, you can have 3D imaging of the health of the plankton, which means you can really test the health of the ocean, and then you can put these microscopes all over the ocean, and then you can actually track how healthy the ocean is, what the flows are, what the temperature is, and how healthy those ecosystems are. And I think the other one that's really interesting beyond illegal fishing is being able to use AI to track species, so to identify species. So whale sharks, for instance, you can tell that they're by certain markings on their ears, which is very difficult for a human eye to tell which kind of shark it is. So with AI and facial or maybe fish recognition, you can actually tell which species they are, which means you can track them, you can track the species, track which bit of ocean they've gone to, and how many stocks there are.
Okay. Celine, coming back to you, with all of this incredible data, the satellite technology, being able to look at everything around the world, how can we use that to also go back to those who are the big offenders? The big coal burners, the big oil producers, those that are dumping rubbish into the oceans that are exacerbating the problem. How do you take all of this work and then also be able to say, look, if we were to go after these individuals, this would help further reduce this more quickly? How do you use that not only to generate economic opportunity and get a lot of these businesses going to help, but how do you kind of say, but we need to also go after those who are really creating the most damage to our planet?
It takes a second for this to kick in. So, that comes back to the kind of accountability and enforcement mechanism, right?
Yep.
So we have laws for a reason, but quite often we have those laws aren't enforced because we don't have the data to be able to enforce them and to enforce compliance on them. So first of all, you need the laws, right? Which is why you need marine protected areas and other things. And then this data set then gives us the real-time visibility. So we're seeing already some early examples of where we have, for example, local African governments who are connected into Google Fishing Watch and others, and are able to start using that real-time to send alerts to fishermen and fines to fishermen who are in waters that are supposed to be kind of preserved areas, for example. Then the nirvana, of course, is that we have this global, real-time, amazing public good data set that can be accessible to governments more broadly and provide real-time alerts, AI infused, to provide that kind of enforcement mechanism. We don't have that yet. That's a public good that needs to be developed more broadly.
So we're talking about policing and public sector, but what could the private sector do to really help escalate this and almost whistleblow on other organizations that are out there that are creating this problem? Is this something that Microsoft could potentially do and say, look, from all of this work that we're doing on AI, companies A, B, and C, these are the problem companies that need to be policed, penalized, whatever. How do you take that and do that from a private sector perspective?
I'm going to be a politician and flip that question.
Okay,
if I may.
All right.
And my answer, as PwC, and my advice would be the same to Microsoft. I think the best that we can do as our companies to help this transition is not to be the whistleblowers. That's not the role of a PwC or a Microsoft. Is to work with these companies to help them understand the transformation that they need to take part and give them the tools and the knowledge to be able to do that. So Microsoft, for example, has access to, democratizing AI is key.
Yep.
The value in technology now is no longer just in the horizontal stack of the tech itself. Where you get the value is when you apply that to vertical domains and sectors, right?
Yep.
And it's not just about supporting SMEs and startups trying to come up with new innovations and scale them and commercialize them. This is about working with the big incumbent industries and helping them transform and decarbonize by using the latest technologies. So I would flip that and say our role as companies is to help industries as a whole decarbonize through digitization and also help better protect the planet more broadly.
And are you doing that? Is there an industry that you can talk generically about where you're already doing that? And maybe Hugh, you can jump in on that too. Where are you helping in terms of big industries?
We do that. That's part of our kind of standard offering, and that's why I now wear two hats of innovation and sustainability. Is these two worlds have to come together.
Okay.
And the session before this was agriculture. The future of agriculture is in precision agriculture, right? Is in being able to have the information to use less inputs to get more outputs to feed the billions of populations we need to, the 9 billion we need to feed over the decades ahead. So that's it. It's the macro level. Industries need to transform, and there's an incredible power in productivity and increasing productivity and reducing waste. And if we can help large companies and small companies alike do that, that's where the power and the transformation happens, not necessarily in whistleblowing. Clearly, what we need is the laws and the regulations to set the carbon prices, to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, to do those macro scale shifts, to encourage electric vehicles penetration, to invest in the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging, to help decentralize grids. Right, because it's all very well having AI, but if you don't have the infrastructure for decentralized grids, then that doesn't help as well. So that's where the policy environment needs to come in.
Great, thank you. Hugh.
And if you think, I couldn't agree more with what you've just said, but if you think about what this report is highlighting is the opportunity that's presented both in the energy sector and in the transport sector in particular. Of the four areas that was looked at, energy and transport, the opportunity is even greater. So if we can, in the conversations that you're having and that Microsoft is having and that others are having with customers in those spaces about how they apply AI to the data that they already have within their company and how do they drive smart insight and smart benefits from that and adjust their behavior, their corporate behavior on the back of that, then there's that tremendous opportunity that comes through. But I really don't think that that's going to work on its own. It also has to take companies like ours, like my company, to really lead in this space and really demonstrate that it is prepared to take a front foot on an issue of such huge importance and really, kind of drive innovation within its own culture, within its own activities, to be a kind of a standard bearer for the right kind of corporate behavior that makes a difference in environmental impact.
I want to ask, and then I'm going to ask each of you to kind of share some closing thoughts with us in a moment, but I want to ask, I hope you don't mind this being such a difficult question, but when I hear about AI and data and how it's going to tackle a lot of issues and the amount of data that's out there that's being processed, one of the things that I'm starting to hear more about is the energy consumption required to support our cloud services, to support our data centers. And it's not an insignificant number. And it's only growing by the day, by the year, because the amount of data that we're capturing and storing and holding is getting bigger and bigger. So as we look at AI and trying to save the planet, what are we doing or what are we thinking about with respect to the energy consumption required to power AI and machine learning and data analytics? Who wants to take that?
I'm having a
Go.
good start.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
So it's quite interesting, isn't it? So if you compare, say, look, I'm gonna go from Microsoft here, okay? Forgive me, audience. Nope. But if you take the difference between, say, Windows 10 and Windows XP, Windows 10 is about a third more energy efficient. Okay, that's just the operating system, nothing to do with the hardware. If you then apply that kind of thinking to how do we have an always-on permanent energy reduction. The move your data, move your compute to cloud is significantly more impactful. It's more cost effective, more environmentally effective than having all that data distributed on PCs and in small server rooms around the country. It is without a doubt. But it's got to go more than that. So the research has got to be permanent in terms of how do we reduce the energy costs of data centers. What do we do in terms of the design of the actual server racks themselves in the data centers? And then what do we do about the not just the energy consumption, where that energy comes from? So are we buying and developing that energy in a sustainable way? Is every data center effectively carbon neutral? And then what do we do to kind of offset where we do have to burn carbon, or where we do actually have to, where energy is being used? How do we use it for onward benefit? So, for example, for community heating, for a whole variety of different areas. But these are very material factors in the siting of any of our data centers. This is, it's one of the fundamental filters that we build in to where do we build it and how do we build it.
Thank you. Great. Anybody want to add to that? Celine.
I'm happy to build on it a little bit. So the first thing is the algorithm counts. So there are some kind of deep reinforcement learning algorithms that are starting to show kind of increased performance from an energy consumption or reduced energy consumption basis. There's different techniques. So if you use inference-based techniques, that again uses less energy consumption. So there's a difference that can be made in what algorithms that you're using. I think how the data centers are powered is the absolute key one. 100% renewable energy has to be the kind of not the gold standard, has to be the standard that we move to. That we move to straight away in terms of the data centers. But I think the thing not to miss, right? Yes, we've many of us probably saw the recent report showing the amount of data it takes to kind of train one of the deep learning algorithms on a particular issue that came out the other week. But the thing you have to remember is once you've trained it, right, the system's impact that algorithm can then have, for example, if you apply it to transforming and enabling the decentralization of a grid so that you can now have a grid that's no longer the traditional transmission and distribution, but can connect, billions of renewable energy sources, and the carbon savings we get from that grid versus the old, that's where the payback really comes. That's what we're focused on. But absolutely, yes. And in the meantime, clearly, we do need to make sure that that those algorithms, where they are happening, are powered off a renewable energy grid.
Great, thank you. We've just got a few minutes left, and I'd like to go to each of you. Final thoughts. You're speaking to a room of technologists here. This is the future of AI sitting in this room. What is your final pitch to them about how they look at and embrace the AI challenge to save the planet? Celine, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so my first one is you've heard my kind of rally call. This is a short-term issue for technologists, for all of us as humanity. We need to solve the planet's crisis. So the call out there is to collaborate, right? To think about, to work with others in other disciplines and collaborate, whether that's through grant programs, whether that's through sharing and democratizing the tools that you're developing, whether that's through actually developing services where you're actually improving the performance. But I would also say not just collaborate, mainstream. Think about where sustainability comes into anything that you're doing. If you're down the vertical of ag tech, think about how you can enhance sustainability performance. If you're down the vertical of insurtech, think about again the environmental benefits that you can maximize through that as well.
Super, thank you. Hugh.
So if you think back to the first industrial revolution, okay, so you had the Luddite movement of the early 1800s. You had laws being brought in 1811 that weren't actually enforced until 1833 with that particular Factory Act. You know, you've got a huge gap between the design of the technology and effectively the introduction of the mitigations of the damage that technology was doing. It's too big a gap. And so, you know, my call would be to say we have to close that gap, which means that we have to ensure that every piece of AI development is cognizant of its environmental and sustainability impact. So we have to hardwire, you know, that kind of understanding of environmental impact into everything that we're doing.
Thank you. Chip.
Okay. Well, I think that I'm very conscious that there was a question you asked earlier that I didn't quite get to answer, but I will. I am actually going to answer that question for 1 minute, if that's all right. And that was something about sort of jobs and how this space is likely to move. And OECD basically says that the ocean economy is going to increase in size, or double in size in the next sort of 10 years or so. That being the case, I think there's a real need and focus for us to look at jobs and sustainability, and not just from the perspective of us sitting here in London in a tech week, but we also got to think about all those people who don't live in London and live in those emerging economies. And I think from our perspective, it's about how you utilize that data, how they can become part of this as well. Because ultimately, I think that there have been a couple of examples of specific examples, but also what are the other things that are taking place at the moment? I think it comes back to alliance building, and something that we're working on is development of an Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. So basically identifying ways in which we can bring private sector funding into this space, but utilizing data from not only the private sector but also the public sector to develop those bigger solutions to the risks that society is facing, not only here in London but across the world.
Great, thank you. Chris, some final thoughts.
I think that we need to be realistic as to exactly what AI can do, and I think, as you said, we have a very short period of time to save ourselves from extinction, and therefore I think anybody in a position should be really challenging their leadership, that they need to actually be declaring that there's emergency. They need to be pivoting the strategy of their business, their company, their organization to focus on the climate crisis, and they need to do everything that they can in their power to make sure that they are doing their bit, which is to make sure that the governments are taking this seriously and acting, because everything that we do with technology can be wonderful, but if governments don't act with big levers very, very quickly, we don't have a chance.
Thank you. Well, I am certainly more confident than where we were an hour ago in terms of where this is heading and the role that AI can play in terms of solving the planet's problems, but the clock is ticking. So Celine, Hugh, Chip, Chris, thank you very much. Thank you for accommodating my grilling. Thank you.